Okay, we're on the air.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do, and it contains important information about our process tonight. First, we start off with any informational items from staff.
I guess the only informational items are that obviously Laura's not available tonight. She's on vacation this week, as is Vera. So I don't think there is any new info.
Okay. Thank you. I think we move on then to audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on the agenda this evening. Brett, first, before I go down this road, I'll ask, is there anybody in attendance that is not otherwise part of our agenda?
Yeah, I don't believe so. I believe both Bonaventure and Dan Redmond are here for the variance application.
Okay, and so that means we'll probably then skip audience partition and go directly into the Bonaventure senior housing application. So this will then begin the public hearing on the Bonaventure senior housing walkway variance. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number VR-2021-013. The purpose of the application is to request a variance for the requirement that the on-site walkways be permeable for the approved senior housing development at 5801 Southeast Kellogg Creek Drive. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provisions, and that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Thank you. The applicable criteria are a Milwaukee Municipal Code subsection 19.504.9, on-site walkways and circulation, section 19.911, variances, and section 19.1006, type 3 review.
Excellent. Thank you, Brett. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address the criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or otherwise issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person via Zoom. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and relevant criteria and to avoid repetitive and non-relevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. We'll start with conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Please raise your hand if so. I'm seeing no hands raised. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? Please raise your hand. Okay, and does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report an ex parte contact? Yes, I see one hand raised, Joseph. Commissioner Edge, please state.
I received an email from the executive director of the North Clackamas Watershed Council and a board member of the North Clackamas Watershed Council towards the beginning of August, inquiring about this application, and I responded to each of them saying that this was a type 3 review that would come before the Planning Commission and that I could not have any contact with them about this, and I received no further emails or other correspondence from them.
Thank you, Commissioner Edge. Justin, I guess I'm looking at you, but I believe that would be, that there wouldn't be anything there necessary to hold Commissioner Edge from participating.
All you have to do for an ex parte contact is declare what happened, what the contact was.
So I think we've crossed that. Great. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Edge. Does anyone have any rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by Commissioner Edge? Nope, I don't see it. And will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to the hearing please raise your hand? Okay, thank you. And did any of those commissioners who had visited the site speak to anyone at the site or know anything that is different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application? If so, please raise your hand. I'm seeing no hands raised and moving on. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of this planning commission? Brett, please let me know if you see hands raised. Please use the hands raised function.
Not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, great. Let's move on. Jurisdictional issues. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission on this matter? Again, Brett, assuming no other audience attendees, right, we will move on then. So now we'll hand the mic over to Brett and ask staff to report presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just give me a moment. I will share my screen. All right. Thank you. Can everyone see that title slide?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So Brett Kelver, Senior Planner with the City of Milwaukee, and I will take you through this discussion of the question about a variance request for the permeability of the walkways at the Bonaventure Senior Housing Development. Just a quick review of the project. The site is adjacent to the Turning Point Church, so kind of at the corner of Rusk Road and Kellogg Creek Drive. And the proposed development would be kind of situated between that church and the Milwaukie Center and the North Clackamas Park. This was a project that was reviewed under a conditional use master file. It involved conditional use, community service use. It was processed started in 2018 with a decision in early 2019. And the proposal was for a multi-story building with 170 units of senior housing of several different types, basically an age-in-place facility with off-street parking provided kind of around the surface of the site. This was the original proposed schematic here, so that you could see the parking spaces kind of scattered around the building and around the loop road. Because of the proximity of Mount Scott Creek and a delineated wetland, the project did involve some disturbance of natural resource areas, and there was mitigation proposed for that. And you can see here on the darkest spots on the drawing, there were 5 different stormwater management facilities, swales that would be planted to handle the stormwater from the project. It did get approved by the Planning Commission in early 2019, and some grading permits to start work on the site were issued later in the fall. They did begin site work, and then due to primarily COVID hit and disrupted this, as well as many other things, as you're aware. So the project has basically been on hiatus since then. Now, the nature of the request relates to the code requirement in 19.504.9 that says on-site walkways are supposed to be a kind of a durable surface, but also permeable for stormwater. And the applicant did not request a variance at the time of the overall package, but the project isn't finished yet, and due in large part due to the timing and suspension, it's provided them the opportunity to kind of rethink whether or not they want to do that, and they have come forward with a variance request. So the arguments that they have made, or the reasons they put forward for this, include the poor drainage on the site, so not a high level of infiltration because of the soil conditions there. Also, just the nature of the facility as a living space for older people who, some of whom may have special mobility issues, just wanting to provide a consistent, smooth, easy to navigate surface. And then just also the nature of what's involved with maintaining permeable walkways. They do have to be maintained a little differently than an impervious concrete walkway. So there were questions about the durability and the maintenance impacts for that. So those are the primary reasons for the requested variance. I think you're all familiar at this point with the approval criteria for variances. The applicant's chosen the route of kind of the standard route of asking for discretionary relief. So they provided some analysis of some of the impacts and the benefits. And then the heart of the discussion is about whether the request is reasonable and appropriate, and does it meet one or more of these criteria about avoiding or minimizing impacts, having some kind of desirable public benefit, and or responding to the environment in a creative way. And as always, raising the question of, is there some kind of mitigation that might be appropriate if the variance were to be granted? So kind of the long and short of this project, it's interesting to have a relatively focused application here, because the key point of this is, should this requirement be waived in this case? Staff's assessment of the application was that it was appropriate. It was a reasonable and appropriate request for some of the reasons stated. We did think about, as was discussed in the staff report, the question of mitigation, and did come to a conclusion that it seemed like there was, part of the purpose and the spirit of the requirement does have an effect that could be mitigated for, in terms of a permeable walkway allowing for a little bit more diffuse and spread around the site infiltration of stormwater. And so what we looked at for some guidance about how to kind of set what seemed to be a rational calculation for what might be some appropriate mitigation was thinking about tree planting and using the city's worksheet for providing tree credit. This isn't quite the exact scenario that one would use the tree credit worksheet, because that would be more a case where an applicant is maybe looking to, maybe they want to try to reduce their costs by not having to construct such a large stormwater management system. And so the city does offer a limited option for downsizing the stormwater facility in exchange for some tree planting. And you'll see in the fine print of this worksheet, there's a limit. There's only once the impervious surface on the site is over a certain square footage, you can only basically get a 10% discount on the stormwater facilities that you're needing. In this case, the applicant has provided stormwater management facilities that are sized adequately to handle all of the runoff from the site. That's everything from the roadway to the roofs to, in fact, I think the original calculations were assuming that these walkways were impervious. So with that in mind, there's no need to upsize those facilities. And all that to say, this isn't quite when we'd be using the tree credit worksheet for the purpose it was intended, but staff did find it to provide an effective and reasonable formula, I guess, for if we were how to think about matching the number of trees that we suggested being planted as mitigation with the amount of impervious surface. So we can talk more about that if you have questions and thoughts about that rationale, but that was part of our conclusion with this. So the recommendation was to allow the walkways to be constructed with an impervious material, and then looking at the landscaping plan for the site. I've got two images here. The largest one is the overall landscaping plan for the site, especially around the building. And then the smaller image to the left is taken from the revised natural resource mitigation plan, where you can see the green shaded areas are the areas that are as approved in 2019, areas that are already the focus of some required mitigation plantings. And so I think I just want to put this out there to say the way that staff tried to word the recommended condition of approval was to allow for some flexibility in terms of determining what locations for tree planting might be appropriate. It's a very large site. There's a lot of room for tree planting. At the same time, there are some areas that are already targeted for mitigation planting, and we wanted to be able to work with the applicant to identify locations for tree planting for this variance, should it be approved, that would, as much as possible, try to remain close to impervious areas. That was one of the, interestingly, is one of the notes on the tree credit worksheet, is to get some of that tree credit, you need to be within 10 feet of impervious surface. And so that's why the condition is worded to put a priority on trying to identify new locations for tree planting that are close to impervious surface, so that we're kind of maximizing the benefit of those mitigation trees, but recognizing that it's a crowded site in terms of some of the other plantings that are trying to happen. So wanting to have some flexibility to be able to look around the site, to starting from a priority of being close to impervious area to taking advantage of some of the other open areas to plant the trees that we're recommending as mitigation. For your reference, as you know, the decision-making options are kind of the standard ones here. We have proposed some recommended findings and the primary condition. Pending your discussion, if you want to make some adjustments, we'll try to capture those and adjust as needed. You do have the option of continuing the hearing. The 120-day clock goes until November. As you know, you have a full slate of other applications coming forward. So we are hopeful that we can get to a decision tonight. And then finally, there is an option if through your discussion you decide that it is not appropriate to award the variance, that you can deny the application and give staff some direction so that we can adjust the findings accordingly. So with that in mind, I think I will leave it there and just ask if you have any questions. I'll keep this presentation open for the moment, just in case it's helpful to refer back to any slides.
All right, thank you, Brett. Appreciate it. Commissioners, are there any clarifying questions you'd like to ask of staff? And I just want to, if you could physically at the moment raise your hand and let me know. That way I can see you, but I'm not seeing. Oh, Adam. Yes. All right. So we'll call on Commissioner Kosh-Rawadi.
Thank you, staff, for that presentation. Thank you, Chair Roosevelt. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Quick question, actually. I'm looking at the packet here. I just want a clarification on the numbers. When it goes into discussing the ratios, are we there? I'm good to ask about this, right?
Yeah.
The 1-to-4 ratio that you discussed.
Hale, stay upstairs, please.
Oh, if you wouldn't mind just going on mute unless you're asking a question.
With the North Clackamas Watershed Council, and then it looked like the city had its own based on the worksheet. Now, it looked like based on the 1-to-4 ratio, it was going to be a total of 170 additional trees. What would it be based on the city's tree worksheet? I didn't see the number on there. I might be missing it.
No, good question. You're not missing it. I didn't do. There's a range that's possible, which is in part why I didn't get into that. I think what we thought following in the guidance of the worksheet, it has two different ratios effectively depending on the type of tree. So an applicant has a choice of if they're planting coniferous trees, they get a little more credit. One coniferous tree is good to cover 200 square feet of impervious area. If you're planting a kind of a more deciduous or broadleaf tree, it's 100 square feet. I suppose the range, if the applicant chose to plant all coniferous trees, and in this case, after talking with the city forester, the recommendation, I guess the lone recommendation for coniferous trees for the site was a ponderosa pine. So if the applicant chose to plant all ponderosa pine as mitigation, the number would be about 69 trees. And part of the rationale for awarding larger, more impervious surface credit for coniferous trees is because they're working all year, in that they're evergreen and they are helping with transpiration, evaporation, all that stuff, versus a broadleaf deciduous tree is, often commonly losing their leaves during part of the year. So I think that's some of the rationale. If the applicant chose to plant all broadleaf deciduous trees, that number would be about double. It'd be about 136, 137 or so trees. So we thought that, again, with specifying some species, one of which was coniferous, the rest were deciduous or broadleaf, that the applicant could maybe pick and choose depending on what seemed to work for the site. But the range, I guess, would be around 69 to about 136, 137 trees, I think.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't see any other hands raised.
Jacob?
Okay,
Jacob
and I can now see your hands, by the way, if you want to do it through Zoom. But Commissioner Massey, how about you start us off?
Would you bring back up the slide Brett, would you bring back up the slide that talked about the three rationales for the variance?
Can you see that now?
I can. I just wanted to make sure I had this in my brain. Okay, thank you.
Let's see. I think Commissioner Sherman, I thought I saw your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Losfeld. Brett, could you go back to the last slide with the graphics, the satellite images? I think wanted to kind of clarify for myself that the 69 to 130 or so potential trees for mitigation aren't represented in these diagrams right now. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Again, to clarify, the larger diagram is showing kind of the landscape planting plan before the variance request. So as approved and as presented for the development permits, the large drawing here is showing where and more or less what kind of landscaping would be happening. The smaller image on the left is showing, again, in that green area, that's the general area where the mitigation planting for the already approved natural resource disturbance would happen. So the way I'm thinking about this is, at least the smaller diagram on the left isn't necessarily excluding those areas for at least some of these proposed new mitigation tree planting. But I think that's where we want to make sure that we're coordinating so that we're not, we want to make sure there's space, whether it's in the natural resource mitigation area or needs to be somewhere else on the site.
Okay, thank you. And then I also had kind of a question, kind of building on Commissioner Khosrowshahi's question, kind of about the ratios, also around kind of survival percentages, length of kind of time to want to see that survival. And so, I noticed that there was kind of the recommendation of going from an 80% survival rate to 100% survival rate. But having that survival rate for 2 years, I saw some of the testimony requesting for longer than 2 years. So it's just hoping that you could kind of help us understand that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, thanks. That aspect of Commissioner Khosrowshahi's question I didn't get to either. So just to explain a little bit more the rationale of the ratios, kind of a starting point, I might have outlined this a little bit in the staff report, I think. We were trying to figure out how to think about kind of how much a tree is worth in the sense of the canopy that it provides. And this was initially, I didn't arrive immediately at the tree credit worksheet. If I had, I think I probably just would have gone right there. But we started talking with the city forester about kind of just trying to come up with some general averages of if, you know, a tree at 5 years old, knowing that there can be a lot of variety in different types of species, but what would be a reasonable square footage of canopy that you might hope or expect it would provide at 5 years? And the number we came up with was like 20 square feet. And so that was what ended up being kind of part of the starting point of the basis for trying to think about how to come up with what might be a reasonable ratio for planting. And I think that's how we got initially to this kind of 1 to 4 idea. And then, and that's what I discussed with the Watershed Council kind of just in advance of them submitting their comments. And it was after we received their comments that we came to the idea of using the tree credit worksheet, because it, again, as I noted, I think in the staff report, even though the rationale isn't expressed explicitly in the worksheet itself, the fact that it is a tool that we already use as the city seemed to provide a defensible and reasonable starting point, I guess, for considering mitigation. Probably more defensible and a little safer feeling than the numbers we've been trying to come up with by, you know, making estimates and generalizations about how much tree canopy a general type of tree might provide at a certain age. So Commissioner Sherman, did I cover all of your question?
I think, yeah, I think you covered the first part. On the second part, I was kind of curious if you could share more on the 80% survival rate, which is, it sounds like it's maybe part of a standard maintenance requirement, right, versus the kind of proposed 100%.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the Natural Resources Code, when mitigation plantings are required for natural resource disturbance, there are some standards about, you know, minimum size of the plantings, and there is a survival standard as well. That standard is that at least 80% of the mitigation plantings must survive, you know, 2 years after the planting date, and you have to replant as needed to achieve or maintain that percentage. The comments from the Watershed Council were really helpful, I think, coming from their experience of doing this kind of work in the field. And I appreciated the suggestion that a 5-year survival period would better ensure the overall success of what was being attempted, I guess, with the proposed mitigation. I felt some discomfort about jumping from 2 to 5, even though we're not in the natural resources section of the code here with this variance request. But again, just because it was providing, this is a spot where our code was providing some guidance about a recommended or required survival rate. In the recommended condition, I thought that one way to bridge the gap, and I know it's not necessarily equivalent or the same, but not feeling comfortable just pulling 5 years out of a hat, from, you know, albeit from the Watershed Council comment, I thought that it did seem more defensible to say to require 100% survival at 2 years, because the purpose of each tree is to cover a certain square footage of impervious surface to make up for that amount. Whereas in a natural resource mitigation way, we are trying to generally improve the health and condition of a riparian area or some kind of other habitat area. And so 80% feels like, hey, it's good. We're doing well. In this case, I thought maybe a compromise might be that could be defended would be to say, we're looking for 100% because it is one tree for 200 square feet or one tree for 100 square feet. You need to make sure that happens, but not necessarily feeling comfortable or like there was necessarily a sound basis to go all the way to 5 years. And also just because of some of the additional resources that might be needed to kind of track the survival for that little longer period of time. So that was the rationale.
A quick follow-up question, Chair Loseville. Great. So just could you help me understand functionally how that kind of 2-year requirement works? Is it for maybe illustrative purposes, tree gets planted on September 14th, 2021, and it needs to be there 2 years later. If it dies, it's required to be replanted. And does that new tree need to be around for 2 years, or is it just once we get to September 14th, 2023, a kind of no holds bar?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the code is, at least I don't feel like the code is quite, well, Justin may disagree. And maybe if we look at it a little more carefully, I guess I feel like the way I understand it is that at the end of 2 years, you need to show that you've got 80% survival. And I have wondered the same thing in terms of thinking through, what do I do in terms of watch guarding this? Because we end up, if every new tree needs to survive 2 more years, then you're in a perpetual monitoring situation. I think it's probably fair to interpret and understand that code requirement, which talks about 80% survival at 2 years after planting, with an annual report on survival presented every 2 years. Without seeing more language that kind of suggests it could be in perpetuity, I think we've generally understood and implemented this as being certainly at the end of year 1, you need to do some more planting to make sure you're staying at 80%. And again, at the end of year 2, I'm not sure what we would do if we were seeing really low success at the end of year 2. If we had seen consistently underperforming percentages, it would certainly feel like we would want to maybe tack on another year. I don't know how defensible that would be. We haven't really had that situation come up yet, but to bring it back together, I think we've understood it to be you need to replant as necessary so that by the end of the 2nd year you've got 80%. And and then I think the hope of the code is that that's sufficient to get things started for long-term management.
I think the idea behind the 2 years is that after 2 years is a pretty good idea on a particular site as to whether or not the trees are going to take and grow. To the extent you have die-off that falls below 80%, then you plant mitigation trees to replace. And I think likely, while it doesn't extend into perpetuity, I think staff continues to check on those trees to make sure that we do have some viability moving forward.
I'm not seeing any further hands raised through Zoom. Brett, I have a question of my own. I'm curious, what is the process for verifying that the trees, 170 of them, have been planted and then checking back on them?
You mean in this specific case, how would we implement this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so whatever the number would end up being, I mean, if you follow staff's recommendation, it could be anywhere within that range based on how the applicant chooses to use the guidance of the worksheet. I think what we would want to do is we would coordinate an identification of planting locations with the applicant and kind of overlay that a little bit with our understanding of where the natural resource mitigation plantings are going. And I think we would want to try to come up with a workable way to either flag some of those trees or to otherwise have it be very clear on some kind of a map where we're looking to be able to confirm from year to year for that 2-year period that those trees have survived, because they would be, as we proposed it, in a little bit different category in terms of survival expectation, that we would be looking for each and every one of those trees to make it at the end of the 2-year period. So I think there's probably a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we implement that. But I was thinking about that as well. Like we'll want to try to find a way to flag or mark, or just have it be very clear which plantings are in which category in terms of the survival expectations. I think that depending on the type of plantings that the applicant would choose, if, for example, they chose to do all coniferous trees for this mitigation, there's a minimum caliper requirement, as well as, I think, a requirement that the trees be at least 5 feet tall. So that would probably make it a little bit easier for at least those plantings to be able to tell. A 5 foot tall planting, I think a lot of the natural resource mitigation plantings will probably be a little bit smaller. They'll probably be more bare root type plantings. So one way or the other, I think you've identified an important operational thing that we just need to be very clear about when we're moving forward with this.
Okay, thank you. And I also see Commissioner Edge has his hand raised. Commissioner Edge.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions that probably, well, I'll start with the first one for you, Brett. Are there, in looking at, or in considering the trees as mitigation, are there any concerns about proportionality that we need to take into consideration? Rough proportionality? Or does that not apply in this case?
No, I think that's probably often an issue. I talked with Justin about this a little bit in advance, which is why we thought it was important to try to land on at least a methodology that seemed defensible, that was, in use in some way elsewhere in the city. Justin, I think the answer is probably yes. Rough proportionality is still at issue. There's not a direct finding in the recommended findings for this, like we have in 19.700 when we're talking about public facility improvements. There's a pretty clear section that wants us to make sure that we've addressed the proportionality issue. I would imagine that in principle it's still in play here, but there's not the variance. I guess it's kind of a fair question for any variance application when we're talking about mitigating impacts. I think probably behind the mitigation option is always probably the shadow of remaining proportional, but there's obviously not a lot of direction in the code about that. So Justin, I guess, do you want to weigh in and share any thoughts you might have about how we manage the question of proportionality?
I wouldn't necessarily approach it from a rough proportionality point of view. I think the spirit of the code is that when you ask for a variance and there are impacts, you're required to mitigate those impacts. And I think, obviously, if you were to consider some sort of mitigation that was wildly disproportionate to the impact that you're trying to mitigate, that would be problematic. So staff and I looked to see, the first question I had from Brett was, how should we approach this? And my thought was, well, we need to look to see how we address mitigating when we look at stormwater facilities, pervious versus impervious pavement. In this particular case, the variance is to go to the impervious pavement. So what impact does that have on our stormwater calculations, and what methodology can we rely on that has at least some reasonable basis in fact? And that's where we went, that's where Brett turned up the tree credit, which that sheet is used for the actual sizing of stormwater facilities, which is arguably the main impact of going from pervious to impervious pavement. I don't know if that answers your question, Joseph, but I don't know that I would use the term rough proportionality. That's kind of a term of art when we look at the rough proportionalities of a development. I think here you're looking at mitigating the impact of the variance request. So determining what that impact is. Here, it's stormwater impact, and how can we mitigate that?
Right, thank you. It does clarify that for me, and I just wanted to be sure that we for considering what we needed to. And so then my next question is the 1-to-4 ratio, could you just clarify again for me, please, the 1-to-4 ratio have any basis in, is there any evidence supporting that ratio as kind of being the gold standard or the preferred ratio in spite of, notwithstanding the tree credit worksheet?
None that we could find. And again, yeah, that came out of my own kind of clumsy calculation, like trying to, in conversation with the city forester, kind of come up with or invent a formula or ratio that might be defensible before coming to the tree credit worksheet. So yeah, I guess the short answer is no, I'm not aware of it being a particular standard that's been used in other places. We were curious to see if it might be, but didn't find anything.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And then my last two questions are probably for Justin. Do you have any concerns about the city imposing a condition of 100% survival for the mitigation trees?
You'll have to refresh my memory of what was suggested by who suggested 100%. I can't remember.
Staff
Yeah.
did.
I don't know that I have a problem with it. It's a difficult standard to meet. I think a lot of this goes to the discussion from an earlier question, which was how do we implement this? This is obviously going to be kind of a working relationship with the applicant to see where we're at. 100% is very difficult to meet, obviously, when you're dealing with natural systems. So I could see there being some difficulty in achieving that standard, which means maybe when we get to 2 years, we look at what the survivability is, we kind of work with the applicant to replace those trees if we've had some die off. There's a good chance that we'll be close to 100% and can move forward. The only hesitancy I have with it is it's difficult to meet 100%.
So can I just chime in? Can I chime in to add there that, I think that the code standard for natural resource mitigation of 80% survival is acknowledging just what you said, Justin, is that it's hard to get everything to survive, especially in kind of a natural resource area kind of context. And I thought that while it does sound, on the one hand, maybe, no, I wouldn't say unrealistic, but like it sounds like a high bar. I think the way I was understanding it is, it just means at the end of 2 years, we need to, if 100 trees ended up being required for mitigation, we need to have 100 living trees in the ground. And then kind of getting back to what we talked about with Commissioner Sherman, from then forward, hopefully most of them would survive. But I think it's just the expectation would be at the end of our required time period, we've got all the trees that were required because each tree was viewed as being, significantly representative of some portion of the impervious area. Not that they would necessarily continue to survive at a 100% rate. I mean, that's the hope, but I think it's just make sure that after 2 years, we kind of got what we started with as the understood mitigation.
And then I would add to that, then the hope is that those trees continue to grow and get to the size where they actually meet the mitigation for the different infiltration numbers.
Right. And then my follow-up question to that is also for Justin. Do you have any concerns about the ability for the city to enforce the 5-year standard instead of 100% at 2 years, 80% at 5 years? How do you feel about that?
I think, and again, I'm not the city forester, but I think the 2-year requirement, why we've landed at that, and that's kind of, I wouldn't say gold standard, but that's a very common standard for plantings, is that by that point, there's usually pretty good establishment for the plantings to continue to thrive. and probably less, you know, if there's going to be a mass die-off or some event that's going to cause a lot to die off, hopefully that would occur within the 2 years if the soils are incompatible with the trees or whatnot. So I think 5 years is a little arduous for a project like this at this scope and this scale. So I don't know that I would say I have a problem with it, but I do think it's a bit arduous. I would concur with staff that 2 years is probably more appropriate.
Okay, thank you both.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Edge. Seeing no further hands raised, I want to move on.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
All right, now is a chance for testimony. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
We have not.
Okay, thank you. This is an opportunity for applicant testimony. Would the applicant or representative like to comment at this time?
I'm just now promoting them both in. So maybe, Mark, if you could just state your name and address and introduce yourself.
Mark Lowen, I'm with Bonaventure, 3425 Boone Road Southeast, Salem, Oregon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you. Thank you, Mark. And go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Mark Lowen with Bonaventure. I'm here with John L., who's also with Bonaventure. And I believe Dan Redman, our geotechnical engineer, is also on board. I want to, first of all, let you know that Bonaventure is really excited to start construction next spring. And we look forward to opening our 170 unit senior housing community, probably the last half of 2024. But as Brett already mentioned, we got put on ice, so to speak, with COVID, and we're excited to get back and get things moving on that. Also want to mention that we really appreciate the efficiency and the open dialogue we've had with Brett and staff as we work through the variants up to this point. Brett has been a great resource for us, helping to navigate the process. We find your staff report well thought out and generally support the recommendations and conditions that are in the report. I'm going to just reiterate a few points, just so you're clear where we're at and what our intentions are. The reasoning behind our variance request is primarily the safety of our residents. Our on-site pedestrian walkways are a critical part of our community. Our residents use these paths on a daily basis, as a lot of them is their one and only means for outdoor exercise. Our design is intentional in that way. You probably saw on the slides that we have paths that encircle the entire building. Our design is intentional that way. Our goal is to provide a continuous walkway around the entire building. We have many of our residents in our existing buildings right now that use these walkways as part of their daily exercise routine. Due to the nature of our business, and Brett already alluded to this too, many of our residents have limited mobility, so it's vital for us to provide a safe, even walking service for them to use. We want to encourage them to get out and about as much as possible, whether it's with their walkers, canes, wheelchairs, or even mobility scooters. What we found, unfortunately, is that pervious concrete does not provide the consistency and reliability we require to ensure a safe walking service for our seniors. Additionally, unlike traditional concrete sidewalks, permeable sidewalks require more ongoing repair and maintenance, and this can limit the availability to our residents who are out using or expecting to use our walkways on a daily basis. Finally, as was stated in the staff report and the geotechnical report from Dan Redman, the conditions of the surface soil on this site under the proposed pervious on-site sidewalks greatly diminishes the water's ability to infiltrate, thus reducing the intended benefit of utilizing permeable concrete. We've reviewed the staff report and recommendations and find the additional tree planting mitigation very acceptable. The opportunity for adding trees to the internal portion of the drive aisles on the site is going to be very limited. And I was also mentioned in the staff report as well. We agree that the most advantageous locations for mitigation trees are going to be near the perimeter of the parking lots and drive aisles, and we will do our best to incorporate as many trees in that area as possible before planting the rest of the rest of the trees in the available open spaces throughout the site. We are available for comments and questions. Again, we appreciate staff and your consideration tonight and look forward to your input.
Excellent, thank you. So at this time, we would move to other testimony and for the application.
Well, that is if the, are there any questions from the
I'm not
commissioners
seeing
for the
anywhere
applicant team?
It's Brett, I think we should make a note, by the way, that's missing from the script. Commissioners, if you would, please raise your hand via Zoom again if you have questions directly. Commissioner Massey, I see your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Roosevelt. This question is for Bonaventure. First of all, let me say, whenever I see more trees, I like more trees. However, I have a couple of questions, and it kind of gets back to, the original application was very thorough. As I remember, it was like 500 or 600 pages long, and it covered in great detail stormwater runoff and, the surrounding natural areas. I thought it was a very comprehensive application back in 19. And my question is, what has changed? I mean, I understand the reasons, but I would think that the soil conditions were known in 19. I would have thought that the safety issues, we knew the demographics of the residents in 2019, and I would assume that we would have known the durability and maintenance issues revolved around permeable sidewalks at that time as well. So I'm trying to understand what has changed between 2019 and now.
Thank you. This is John Eld with Bonaventure. So one of the things, unfortunately, the project manager who worked on this project during that time is no longer here. But what I can say is that from what I recall, this was something that came as a bit of a surprise to us as far as the requiring permeable sidewalks. And we had every intention to appeal it and to ask for a variance after the staff report and after the initial decision had been made. Just with everything that's gone on with COVID, our priorities have been focused on our existing communities, which is why there's been some delay in coming back to this. But it was always our intention from 2019 to come back and address this, because it has always been a concern of ours. Again, the biggest concern being safety, because this is something that's unusual. We've developed over 48 of these communities across 6 Western states in the last 20 years, and we've never come across a code requirement requiring permeable sidewalks around the community. So it was a very unique situation, and safety is our foremost concern for our seniors, and permeable concrete and permeable sidewalks just have they're less likely to create that stable, safe environment that traditional concrete does. So
would it be accurate to say we really nothing has really changed? There was just some delay in submitting the variance because of various circumstances that you have described?
That would be accurate, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Massey. I have a question of my own. I'd just like to ask whether or not it was considered to include pervious pavement for the parking area rather than the sidewalk, which would get you to a similar end result or goal as for sidewalks.
We did not have that discussion with staff. I think ultimately, based on the discussions we had with our geotechnical engineer, and the fact that the soils underneath the site don't allow for infiltration and water percolation, as well, that going to pervious asphalt really wouldn't be accomplishing the goal any more than a pervious concrete, because the soils aren't suitable to handle that. So it really, the ultimate goal being able to have the water go back into the ground wouldn't be accomplished. So it didn't seem to make sense to explore that option.
Okay. Are there others? I'm not seeing any hands raised over in chat. And if I'm not seeing any hands raised, then I am going to continue on. I'm going to thank you all for being present this evening. I appreciate your attendance tonight. Let's see here. Now I'm going to move on to testimony in support of the application. And Brett, just a quick check to see if any additional attendees have joined into the meeting since we checked in at the top of the meeting agenda.
No, I'm not seeing any other attendees, and I've returned the Bonaventure team and Dan Redmond back to that status, but there are no other people in that queue.
Okay, if that's the case, I'm going to skip past testimony in opposition and neutral testimony. We're going to skip past any planning commission questions specific to that testimony and rebuttal, and go straight to closing of the public hearing. So the public testimony portion of this hearing on VR-2021-013, a variance for Bonaventure Senior Housing Walkways, is now closed. This is an opportunity now for the commission to discuss. Would anybody like to start us off? Sure. Okay. Commissioner Edge, go ahead.
I'm sorry, was that me?
That's you. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, you cut in, or I lost my audio there while you were talking, so I didn't hear that. Well, I appreciate the effort that staff put into this. It seems like such a simple thing. It'd be really straightforward and everything. But I appreciate that we really, tried to understand what the intent of the standard was and, find mitigation for that. I appreciate ultimately that we found a calculus for the mitigation that is part of a formula that the city already uses and for this, or for a very similar purpose. So, I honestly think that, we've covered all of our bases adequately here, and, I'd be happy to support approval of this with the conditions of approval that staff included with the report.
Sorry, guys. I have attempting to talk with the mic turned off. I was reaching out to Adam, and Adam was not responding. So, Commissioner Kashrabadi, I think I saw your hand go up at one point. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that, Chair Roosevelt. Yeah, this doesn't seem like a difficult variance to decide on at all. Looking at the North Clackamas watersheds information is a little concerning, but it looks like we're good with runoff. We're not going to have an issue there, from what I understand. The swales are big enough for any additional runoff that the concrete may create. My biggest concern is not my biggest concern, but I guess the concern that we're on is with the trees, is making sure that these things get done and get properly done, because the bottom line is this concrete's going to last for 30 plus years. you know, we're only asking for possibly 5 years of these trees surviving. So I just want to make sure that it's not just, it doesn't just end there, that it's a continual thing, because like I said, concrete's going to last, and that's not going to change. But you know, the trees and the canopies are what we're losing currently. So I was worried about the stormwater runoff. I still am, but based on the findings, it sounds like we'll be okay with that. And looking at the soil reports, and you know, I can't understand any of that stuff, but I'm going to take their word for it that the soil is the issue, and that it wouldn't achieve the goal of having a permeable concrete there. But yeah, I would like more, I don't know, assurance, I guess, on the survival of these trees.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Koster-Body. Commissioner Hemer?
So I'm going to ask a question to the group, and that would be people that are smarter than I, which is everybody here, so I appreciate it. When I look at this, and I look at the way that the path is on the inside of the parking lot, it seems to me that that may not have been the intent of the water quality resource, that it was meant more for maybe a sidewalk that's on the outside of a parking lot than maybe on the inside. Am I the only one that thinks that, or am I a little crazy, I guess is my question.
Personally had not caught on to that or found that, you know, unreasonable. Are there others who want to chime in? Greg, do you want to continue with that stream of thoughts?
I guess my point is that I think the mitigation, the way that it's written, is fine. I don't think that we need to go above and beyond the way that it's already proposed. I think that you're getting a huge bonus out of this, even without the mitigation. So I like it the way that it is written and proposed.
You say you are getting a huge bonus. I think you mean the city of Milwaukie.
I think the residents and the people that will be living at Bonaventure will be getting a huge bonus by the addition of those trees.
Yep, I appreciate that. Yep. Okay, Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks. I think in many ways, I share some of your thoughts, Commissioner Kozer-Body, about kind of hoping we could kind of really ensure the survival rate of the trees. And I think as I kind of think about it, you know, I think about, you know, something like, you know, the 80% standard, which sounds fairly standard. And in many ways, I think I would rather have 80% alive at the end of 5 years versus 100% around at the end of 2 years. I think that's a better trade. So that's, I think, kind of one piece. And I think it's really important that we consider that longer survival rate, especially, you know, with the impacts of climate change, and you know, how the heat dome this summer just, you know, devastated a number of the plants in my garden, regardless of the fact that I was watering them, you know, very consistently. So thinking about kind of that climate change component and making sure that we can have those trees there for the long run, especially knowing that those trees, we're asking those trees to essentially provide a permanent stormwater impact that's having a positive impact on our facilities. So I think that longer survival rate would be what at a lower percentage would be something that I would be advocate for, and would be very curious to hear about from others on this commission. I also have maybe a question for Commissioner Massey with your question about what changed, because these are things that I was kind of thinking about as well. And, you know, I understand, you know, how the pandemic has had, you know, significant impact on all of us, but also can't help but note that, you know, the notice of decision was February 28th of 2019, which was a year before the pandemic happened. So, and the appeal window closed in March of 2019, again, a year before the pandemic happened. So I'd be curious to kind of hear more of your thoughts on that topic, Commissioner Massey, and what was behind that question or any perspective you might have.
Well, really, my only question is, I saw these rationales. I'm not even arguing with the rationale, but I go, I remember that package. It was very comprehensive. There was soil tests, there was everything. And so my thought was the infiltration rates were known then. The demographics of the population were known then. And I'm pretty confident of those. Maybe the durability and maintenance issues it was an unknown, because if they don't really use permeable sidewalks, then that may not have been a known factor. But from my perspective, I was, I just would have thought that those were known quantities at the time.
Commissioner Massey and Commissioner Sherman, I appreciate this conversation, but I do want to keep us on track with the criteria, the applicable criteria, of which this is not pertinent to. So I'm getting prompted by our city attorney to make sure we stay on topic. So I'm going to move on. Commissioner Sherman, is there anything else you want to add to this?
No, I'd be curious about other commissioners' thoughts on maybe changing that condition of approval from 5 years or from 2 years at 100% to 5 years at 80%.
Okay. Commissioner Edge, you've been patient. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to respond to Commissioner Sherman's question about that. I would be fine with either taking the 80% standard and extending that out 5 years, or taking the 2-year standard and increasing the survival rate to 100%. Either of those scenarios I'm comfortable with. I am, affirmatively comfortable with supporting. So, however the commission wanted to go with that, I would support either way.
Commissioner Kostrobody?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just in agreement with Commissioner Sherman. I'd like to see the 5 year at 80% as well.
5 year at 80%. Okay. Anybody else wanted to speak specifically to that piece? 2 years versus 5 years, 80 or 100? Okay. Do any other commissioners have comments they want to raise before I ask for a motion? None. I'm seeing none.
Commissioner Hemer has his.
Does he? He does. I'm sorry, Commissioner. Go ahead.
I just want to remind the commission of the discussion that Brett had during his presentation, and that question was directly asked. He said, well, the city has precedents for this 2 year 80. The city attorney also responded back, well, this is kind of like a typical standard that they have. And so I will not support going beyond that. I too have reservations about who's going to go out there and go check this and who's going to go and figure this out. But really what you're doing is your 80% rate. Generally what happens is that when you have to jam in 100 trees over a bunch of concrete, you're going to plant them too close anyways, and you're going to expect some of those to die out to be able to make the other trees actually become full. And so that's where the standard probably kind of lies and comes. And so I'm not willing to go beyond the standard that is proposed.
Thank you, Commissioner Hemer. Okay, with that in mind, I think we've heard kind of all a range of the topics of concern here. I'd like to entertain a motion.
I motion to approve VR-2021-013 with the amendment on page 5 of 6 in the conditions of approval, that the condition be changed at the bottom of the second paragraph The text reads that each new tree is mitigation for a specific amount of impervious walkway. The condition requires the change being 80% survival rate at 5 years for the number of trees planted.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I would second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'd like to take a poll. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Seeing all hands raised but one. The motion has been approved. Thank you very much, all. So then we move on to appeal rights. If anyone wishes to appeal the decision of the City Council, you can complete an application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of mailing of notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. Moving on to other business, do commissioners or staff have any other business or updates? Commissioner Hammer.
I never know if it's a commercial time or not, but I'm going to give you this one. September 19th, this Sunday. Come on down to going to Milwaukie Bay Park and buy your little plastic duck for $5. And I tell you what, if it's going to be pouring down rain, it's going to be an exciting race. You can win about $150. So come on down. I believe it's from 1 to 4. And support your Milwaukie Parks Foundation and Milwaukie Bay Park with this tremendous celebration.
Our family has supported, let's see, our family has supported 6 ducks. And Commissioner Hemer, I am really interested in how they are going to equitably pour hundreds, what I imagine is going to be hundreds of ducks in at the same time so everybody gets a fair race. How are they dropping them?
Well, all I know is that number 71 through 74 has already been placed with extra special weights on them to give them a head start. So if you don't have those numbers, I don't know who has them, but I don't know who has those numbers, then I can't necessarily say that. But I tell you what, no matter how it turns out, if it's equitable or not, if one little ducky gets stuck on the bottom, it's just the way that it goes. It's all part of the duck races. That's what makes it so much fun.
Awesome. Anybody else? Yeah, Commissioner Sherman, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, sir. Yep.
It's you every time. For any runners or walkers on the commission or out there, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that we have a sizable running and walking race coming to Milwaukie. It's called the Run Like Hell race. It takes place on on Saturday, October 30th, and is starting at the Elks Lodge, going down the trolley trail and coming back and ending at the Elks Lodge. And you can either do it as a 5K or a 10K, which is 3 miles or 6 miles. But really excited to see something like this happening in our city and taking advantage of some of the great infrastructure that we have. So I want to just share that with everybody. You can find out more information online.
Are costumes encouraged?
Oh yeah, that's it. That's a big part of it, is getting all dressed up in your costume and then going on the run or the walk.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Brett has his hand raised.
I wasn't sure if this was the time to just thank you all for your attention tonight, and to note and remind you that we do have some full agendas coming up for you 2 weeks from tonight, September 28th. You'll be hearing the Coho Point redevelopment application. And then at both of your October meetings, October 12th and 26th, Vera will be coming at you with the draft middle housing related code updates. So thank you for your attention tonight, and keep bringing it. We've got the next couple meetings are going to be big ones.
Brett, did I see on the first middle housing that there's also a hearing too as well?
Well, let's see. Let me look real quickly.
I turned off my tablet.
Yeah, right. That's right. There is a hearing for I guess it's the final development plan for the Hillside Plan Development, I think is scheduled for October 12th, in addition to the Middle Housing Code hearing. So yeah, the Hillside Final Development Plan is coming to you that night as well.
So I'd like to make a motion that Chair Roosevelt get lots of sleep on Monday night because we're probably going to be expending that meeting to midnight.
Send some Red Bull to everyone.
Right?
Brett, I have the question that you might be well positioned or not, or Justin or not. So maybe Vera will want to take it or Laura will want to take it. But I was just kind of trying to understand kind of on the larger kind of public hearing process. You know, so we're going to be we'll be having these hearings. We'll be receiving a lot of input. I would maybe anticipate at some point there might be tweaks that staff based on input or the commission based on input wants to make. I guess my question is, those tweaks probably get made, and then is there notice again about here's the second draft or final draft code that goes back out for then that kind of final round of deliberation? And again, I recognize you might not be the appropriate person to ask that question, but this was just something I was thinking about, and was wondering if you or Justin, or if we should just get some input from Laura or Vera when they're back.
I'm always happy to speculate, and I will, but I'll give Justin the opportunity to answer if he knows a real answer to that first.
Well, I would go back to other legislative enactments that we've done in the past, most recently the comp plan, where it was a constantly moving target, right? So we noticed the hearing keeps going. What staff does is they bring back new things. So it's all in the context of the same hearing, right? So you're not noticing a new hearing, but they'll come back and there'll be a package, and it's kind of an evolving process to get to the final adopted version, which you will make your recommendation based upon to City Council. So I don't think it's noticed in the way that we notice a new hearing, because each one is its own hearing, right? Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense to me.
And of course, I would defer to Vera because she's the person in charge of all this, but that's how I would, that's the closest correlated thing that we've done in the past would be the comp plan, where we went through a very iterative process with the public, with the planning commission, and then the same process when we went up with council. So.
Okay, is that enough? Okay, we'll take a motion for adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
All right. Anybody like to cast a vote to second that?
Second the motion.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Good to see you. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Brett. Have a good night.
All right.
Good to see you, Brett.
Bye. Likewise.